How to handle a low appraisal when a buyer is obtaining conventional financing. To answer this question, we take a look at the contract, specifically any attached exhibits. For example, GAR F404, Conventional Financing Exhibit. On page 2, paragraph 11, we see Appraisal Contingency. In addition to buyer's other rights herein, this agreement shall be subject to the following appraisal contingency. Buyer shall cause the lender to A. Select an appraiser to perform one or more appraisals of the property, and B. Provide seller with a copy of any appraisal that is for less than the purchase price of the property. If any such appraisal is for less than the purchase price, buyer shall, within blank days of the binding agreement date, this is typically a 20 to 25 day window, have the right to request that seller reduce the sales price of the property to a price not less than the appraised price by submitting an amendment to sales price to the seller along with a copy of the appraisal supporting the lower price. If buyer does not timely submit the amendment to the seller, buyer shall be deemed to have waived their right to do so, and this agreement shall no longer be subject to an appraisal contingency. A buyer may submit GAR F713, Amendment to Sales Price, along with a copy of the appraisal to the seller. Or they could simply pay the difference at closing between the appraisal value and the contract sales price. Now let's take a look at the very next paragraph in section 11, which sets forth the time frame for acceptance, because it's important to note that the buyer doesn't have a right to simply terminate because the property did not appraise. They would need to follow this step-by-step process if they wish to seek a price reduction, give the seller an opportunity to accept that amendment before they would have a right to simply walk away. So this paragraph states, seller shall, within 3 days of the date of an amendment to reduce the sales price, but no later than 2 days prior to closing. We're usually not that far along in the game, but in the event that's the case, accept or reject the amendment, or seek to negotiate with buyer a lesser reduction in the sales price of property than what is referenced. If within the above time frame, an amendment has not been signed and accepted by the buyer and seller and timely delivered to create a legally enforceable amendment, buyer shall have an additional 3 days, but not later than 1 day prior to closing, to terminate this agreement without penalty. If buyer does not terminate the agreement within this time frame, buyer's right to terminate due to the failure to agree to an amendment to reduce the sales price shall be waived, and buyer shall close on the property for the purchase price set forth in this agreement. Nothing herein shall require buyer to seek a reduction in the sales price of the property. So the seller has 3 days to accept or reject the amendment. If the amendment is not accepted, buyer has an additional 3 days that they could elect to unilaterally terminate the agreement. Carefully review the terms of any non-GAR contracts, such as any financing or appraisal language contained within the contract or attached exhibits. RE form users should note that the appraisal contingency is contained within the body of the contract itself and further detailed within the amendatory clause language contained on the FHA or VA exhibit. Preparing a summary of comparable market sales, a list of upgrades to the property, and any information that supports the contract sales price can be very, very helpful. We call this an appraiser's package, and it's a great idea to leave this in the property for the appraiser to review. Challenging an appraisal can be quite difficult. Consult with the lender regarding a potential appraisal dispute process if the buyer and seller are interested in disputing the appraisal. Note that supporting market sales will be very helpful in this type of an effort. Pay attention to contract timeframes, because oftentimes when parties are challenging an appraisal, we may need to also amend the contract to extend the closing date or any other contingencies. So just pay attention to that as well.